Today we're going to be discussing what laws were passed to regulate big business. And by regulate we're meaning control, because that's going to be a vocabulary word that you're going to see throughout the school year. There were many factors that contributed to the growth of American industry. Raw materials, a large and growing labor supply, most of it were immigrants who were not familiar with the country, weren't familiar with the language, the customs, the culture. A lot of them worked long hours, were paid very low pay. Also, inventions and innovations, those were also contributed to the American industry. A lot of the inventions and innovations that we've already talked about, such as the Bessemer process that wound up making steel at a much more faster, efficient rate. And a lot of other businesses, such as the railroad companies, were able to benefit from the Bessemer process and steel. Other factors that contributed to American industry would be the ambitious, ruthless entrepreneurs and a federal government that was eager to assist the growth of business. So some of those entrepreneurs that we've discussed, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Vanderbilt. Government often had a laissez faire approach, meaning a hands-off approach to business. And while business growth was good for the economy, this hands-off approach contributed to a culture where business had somewhat of an unfair advantage. And when we look at that unfair advantage, we can kind of see some of the things that they did that people had a problem with, particularly in how they eliminated competition. Right. One of which was offering rebates to big customers. Now this was something that would hurt small businesses, and it would particularly hurt the small farmers. Farmers were a particular group that needed a rebate when it came to shipping some of their crops to market, but they were often the ones that were left out in rebates. It was only given to big customers like John Rockefeller and Standard Oil. Practice by the railroad companies practice was also involving forming pools. This is where you had several railroad companies that would divide up a certain area, and once they had control of that particular area, they would raise the rate very high. Other companies, some things that they did to eliminate competition, they would buy out smaller companies. Other companies would slash prices, and then when they didn't have any competition anymore, they would increase them when there was no competition. And another thing that was very common that often became the culture of it was bribing government officials, something that we could see in this next political cartoon. What you see in this political cartoon is Standard Oil, and of course he's seen as this mean octopus. And when you look around and see what his tentacles have control over, right, Rockefeller has control of the shipping industry. Right, he has control of Congress in the upper left-hand corner, and over here on the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, you have state capitals. What he doesn't have his tentacle on just yet is the White House, but what he does have is tentacles controlling his other businesses and politicians. So this just gives you an idea of what kind of power and control entrepreneurs, successful ones like Rockefeller, had. Of course, when you look at a trust, to familiarize ourselves with the word, a trust is a group of corporations that's run by a single board of directors. Now, just about in any case, I mean, we're talking a great deal throughout this unit about why trusts are bad, but we have to be fair and look at it from both sides. Of course, a lot of these big businesses would say that, you know, the case for trusts, why they were good, too much competition would ruin business and putting people out of work. So that's why one reason why trusts were good. Another reason, with trust, you had lower production costs, you had lower prices, you had higher wages. All right. But then you had the case against trust that people often had a problem with. Right? It reduced competition. Right? Very, very difficult for small businesses to actually get a start and actually be successful and thrive. Again, hurting the small businesses. Big business owners were buying favors from elected officials. This was something that was often complained about when we talked about corruption in business and corruption in government, was that the elected officials weren't the ones that often had the power. It was often the big businesses, as you can see in this next cartoon. And as we go and analyze this cartoon, I mean, clearly in this cartoon, who has the power in here? These big trusts that are just in the background, and then other evidence as you're looking through. The people's entrance is closed. The sign saying this is a Senate of the monopolist, by the monopolist, for the monopolist. Here you have an entrance for the monopolist. And of course, when we're looking at the Senate, who should have the power? It's the people. But who doesn't? You have all of these huge trusts over here, and one of the things that the cartoonist does to exaggerate this is that he makes them look like these huge money bags, while you have all of your senators who represent the people are depicted as very, very small, very weak, and they don't have the power in the Senate. So this was a problem, And since it was a problem, one of the things that we have to do is that now, once people started to get some momentum, you had others who were writing about the unfair practices of Standard Oil, people such as Ida Tarbell. You did have other government officials who were starting to advocate on the people's behalf, one of them being Robert LaFollette when it came into empowering voters. But when we're looking at business, now we have to kind of control and get this corruption and this power that they have in government under control. So one of the things that they're going to pass is the this is the Sherman Antitrust Act, excuse me. The Sherman Antitrust Act is going to prohibit the formation of trust and monopolies. And the big thing with the Sherman Antitrust Act is that once they had control of a particular industry, they no longer had competition. And if you don't have competition anymore, you really don't have a reason to improve your product or your service, which means that a lot of these companies, once they have that particular control, they're going to raise the prices. They're not going to have to improve it. They don't have to improve it. They don't have to worry anymore because they don't have any competition. Something else that's going to be set up by government that's going to help get things under control is the Interstate Commerce Act. When you're talking about a business that goes across state lines, we're particularly referring to the railroad companies. They're going to forbid practices such as pools. They're going to forbid practices such as rebates. It's also going to set up an Interstate Commerce Commission that's going to oversee the railroads. Right. This Interstate Commerce Commission is going to be one of these commissions set up by the government that's going to oversee any business that crosses state lines. Just to sum up some laws that were passed to regulate big business, we have the Interstate Commerce Commission, the Interstate Commerce Act, and the Sherman Antitrust Act.